Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, and I'm joined, as always, by my Minnesota Star Tribune coworkers, Ben Goessling and Andrew Krammer. We are all in Minnesota, and there are reports as of just about half an hour before we started recording that Aaron Rodgers is in Pittsburgh meeting with the Steelers. It seems we have closed the loop on that for the most part this week, with some reporting, Ben, that you did, seeming like that any open conversation there was about Rodgers and the Vikings with the Vikings seems to have at least gone off the table for right now. Is that how you would put it?
Yeah, it is. I think the conversation is not 100% dead. I mean, if you sign somewhere else or they sign another quarterback, it is. But it is in very critical condition to the point where I would not put money on him being here. I think they have made the decision after talking about it. There was certainly interest in the building. That is not a secret. That also does not mean that we are at the point where a deal was going to get consummated, because there are a lot of layers here, as we've talked about. But they have kind of made the decision to move on to JJ McCarthy. That is the plan going into the offseason, is that JJ McCarthy will be the guy. Doesn't mean that it sticks that way if they find something else that they need to do, or something changes in the long term. But I don't think at this point that Aaron Rodgers is a likely possibility. The idea of how likely it was, I think, was always a question. There was interest, certainly interest on Aaron Rodgers' part, interest on Kevin O'Connell's part. Learned more this week about how far back that relationship goes. The two of them are only about 18 months apart, grew up in the West Coast, probably met, playing quarterback, growing up in those same kind of circles that you end up running in as a quarterback when you're coming up these days. And they've known each other for quite a long time. So there was interest, but in the end, as we've talked about, it was a complicated situation with a guy that Ted Thompson described as a complicated fella. So the complicated fella, as we speak, is in Pittsburgh, looking at the possibility of teaming up with the coach that he beat for his only Super Bowl title to date. So that's where we stand, and I think we are probably looking at the Aaron Rodgers career arc, not following the final stage of Brett Favre's path through the NFL.
So this is no longer on the you say critical, or how did you frame it? You said kind of on life support, essentially, this talker. It's not the 50-50 proposition that it was kind of framed as, is what you're saying.
No, I don't think it is. And I don't know that it was ever 50-50. I mean, there was certainly intrigue. It's one of those things that you talk about because it's Aaron Rodgers. It's a guy that's won 4 MVPs. And if he is talking about coming to Minnesota, then you have the conversation, just because, well, let's sit and see what we can get out of this guy in terms of if he has a good year, if he buys in, if he works well with the offense. I mean, I remembered this week that when the Packers drafted Jordan Love that year, Rodgers wanted them to take a receiver, and the receiver he liked in that draft was Justin Jefferson. He was on record about this, saying that I was hoping we got the kid from LSU who I was really impressed with. So, it's not hard to do the math in terms of where he would have wanted to be. But no, I think a lot of this was always let's stop and look at it because, like we said, it's that guy with that resume, and it's that guy with all of the other things that come with that guy. So you have to have a pretty detailed conversation if you're going to discuss it. But I think it was always more of a fancy, more of a flirtation than anything that was at a 50-50 point, at least from the reporting that I've done.
So now we kind of are back at not square one in a way, but just in terms of the Vikings needing a quarterback to pair with McCarthy. Who do we think are the top options at this point? And maybe not just the top options, but like who are some connected QBs to this program, this franchise program? That's such a college term. This franchise that could be the one they bring in here.
Well, I mean, Joe Flacco, we've talked about a little bit. I think that's going to be an option. Ryan Tannehill that's another name I've heard. He shares an agent with JJ McCarthy. Tannehill did not play last year, so where they would get him, kind of what that would bring for them, I think is a question. But a trade is still a possibility. I mean, you've got guys who are in backup jobs in different places that they could think about bringing in. I don't think the Falcons are going to do it, and Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause. There's a lot of reasons I don't think that makes a ton of sense. But I think Cousins would have interest in being here if he didn't think there were an opportunity to start somewhere else. It's familiar. Obviously, he knows the offense. You have to work out a lot of things with the fit, but they could look at something like that. I think it's a veteran that understands the role and knows that it's McCarthy's job to run with. And if it doesn't work out, then you figure that out. But I think you're looking in that market, some of the backups you could trade for. I think I heard Aiden O'Connell's name. That would get a little strange, but Kevin O'Connell's long lost relative. I mean, you could connect a lot of dots and say there's easy ways to make deals for a guy like that. I mean, let's not forget they traded for Nick Mullins in August a couple of years ago after he looked good against them in the preseason. I actually heard this week that Josh Dobbs was a guy they looked at bringing back for a second tour of duty in Minnesota. Obviously, he didn't sign here, got another deal, but they're looking kind of in that market, at least from what I understand at this point.
Oh, and speaking of Nick Mullins, the Vikings are used to having a kind of a gunslinger quarterback, and Jameis Winston is out there as well.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if he would be an option for them. Somebody who's been very productive and could use the kind of Kevin O'Connell magic that he just gave Sam Darnold in terms of lowering those turnovers, trying to make smart decisions. I could see that just making sense in terms of a fit and a guy who's been a proven starter for them. Because, Ben, it seems like Rodgers was the only guy worth talking about who could come in there and obstruct JJ McCarthy's path to being a starter. All these options, you're talking about that are even just out there on free agent lists. They're not guys who are going to come in here and threaten JJ McCarthy.
No, they're not. And that's the funny thing with Rodgers is one of the things I heard this week is the only scenario that this would really be plausible if he still comes in and says, Rodgers said, I'm going to sign cheap. And then, as we know, roles go with contracts in the NFL. So, he may not have to say, I'm going to take a backup role or I'm going to take an open competition. But if you sign him for $1 million or something, or, say it's 3, whatever, pick a number. It's not high enough that if something went badly, you couldn't say, well, we got to hang on to this guy for the rest of the year. So, I mean, that would be an odd turn of events, but I think that type of a scenario was the most plausible way for this to happen. And maybe we still get there if he doesn't sign somewhere, but I don't, like I say, I just think that's such a remote possibility that I'm not really considering it to be a likelihood at this point. I think the other thing that we should think about, whoever it is how this affects the comp pick situation, because they now, I believe, I think over the cap talked about this, they would be back in line to get a 4th, I think, for Daniel Jones, now that Cam Robinson signed his deal. So if you got a 3rd for Darnold and a 4th for Jones, that's pretty good compensation for running the QB rehab center. And, that type of a thing, I don't think they want to jeopardize. So it's part of the reason they sign guys like Jonathan Allen. I think it's part of the reason they could wait on a quarterback until the Monday after the draft, when that comp pick formula is no longer affected by anybody you sign. So we could be waiting a while on this yet, unless they made a trade somewhere and then it doesn't affect it. But it's not something that I think is going to reach a resolution tomorrow by any means.
That's interesting because, sorry, Emily, but with the NFLPA report card and all that stuff, Ben, you mentioned them waiting. Only a team that's a good destination could do that, right? If you're the Jacksonville Jaguars and you say, hey, Jameis, wait for us, they're going to be like, no, it's all right. I'm going to go elsewhere. But people want to be here.
Yeah, they do. I mean, and that has been something we've seen from those surveys. I think it's something we've seen from quarterbacks kind of talking about this place the way they have and making the decisions that they have. I mean, it's the facilities, it's the coaching, it's the roster. It's the fact that the stadium is still one of the best in the NFL. It's the overall kind of overarching thing with ownership of, we're going to spend on the things that we need to spend on to be successful. The medical staff, a lot of these things are marks of an organization that people want to be around. And I think that plays in their favor. So yes, they get a little bit of preferential treatment, probably from some of these free agents saying, hey, if you guys are talking, I'm going to listen. I'm going to sit up and listen. So, that may help them in this case as well.
And I think it's worth saying too, like, we know the Vikings like a big quarterback room. So I don't know that we're just talking about only one signing here. Like, they could bring in 2 guys to compete for the backup role, not compete with McCarthy for the starting role, but bring in 2 of these guys further down the list that we've kind of talked about today and in other episodes. Aiden O'Connell, Drew Lock, some of those mid-20s guys who have been a couple spots, been in the league a few years, but have never been like bona fide certified starters, and have those guys kind of compete. We know they like that type of quarterback room, having a quarterback room with optionality, as we toss around that word that Quasey likes a lot. Let's move on and talk about some of the other signings. There were a few more this week. Andrew, cornerback Jeff Okudah, and then wide receiver Rondale Moore, both of whom had come on visits. Jeff Okudah signed pretty quickly after his. Rondale Moore, I think, took the weekend. Just what are the Vikings adding in each of those guys?
Yeah, depth. I mean, Ben's talked about this before with Rondale Moore, but he brings a different element if he's healthy. The Vikings, having hosted him last week, probably got a good idea. And obviously before signing him, going through a physical of what kind of shape he was in, coming off an August knee injury. But he only turns 25 or 26, I believe, this summer, still in his athletic prime if he can return to it. And somebody that Gophers fans are very well familiar with how much he can hurt them. And the Vikings are too. His longest play to date was against the Vikings in 2021. He's a big catch and run threat and somebody that can add that maybe a better version of what Brandon Powell gave them. And Brandon Powell's unsigned currently and obviously was their punt returner. Rondale Moore handled punts for the Cardinals in 2021. So I do think this is somebody that they see potentially as a Brandon Powell replacement, because Powell was one of the worst punt returners in the NFL last year by average. So they need to improve there. They could improve as well at that kind of third, fourth wide receiver spot, give them something that, frankly, in the screen game, when it comes to wide receivers, they have not done well. But we also know that they don't have a ton of people to block for him either. And they lost their best blocking wide receiver in Trent Sherfield to the Broncos. So it's going to be interesting to see how Moore fits, how healthy he is. Okudah is just a depth piece. He's somebody who has not started in 2 years. He started for the Falcons back in 2023. He was kind of a depth addition and special teamer for the Texans last year. A talented guy, obviously, but he's on, I think, his fourth different team in as many years. So I don't know how much he's going to give you outside of just some depth and bodies. And we all know just one more that they need a lot of bodies at corner.
Well, and that's also one of those signings. We've seen them do this with high-end players that were first-round picks that haven't worked out somewhere else for one reason or another. I mean, injuries have been part of it, and I think they make a lot of these bets with their medical staff that they're going to be able to help those players stay healthy. I think there's probably a bet here with Okudah that if you put him in this system, you can teach him a little bit differently. I mean, he's been grabby, not the first Detroit corner we've ever said that about, or not the last, but probably we've ever said that about. The Lions, by the way, are proposing a rule, I think, to reduce the, I think, was it taking away an automatic first down for defensive holding?
Yes.
Like, insert your own joke here that the Lions of all teams would say, no, we want this to go away. Help us grab your wide receivers more than we already do with no repercussions for it. I'm sure that'll get a lot of hearing at the owners' meetings here in a couple of weeks. But yeah, Okudah, I think, is one of those high upside types where you figure if you can get him into a system where it works. Obviously, he was the third overall pick in the draft for a reason. I mean, he's a traits guy, and I think they probably are betting on that a little bit. Maybe you get a little bit more out of him. But yeah, I mean, they need guys like that. They need to be able to gamble on things because they need help in that room still. I mean, Murphy being back is big. Isaiah Rodgers, Mekhi Blackman. I mean, certainly those things help, but you still need more of those guys, especially if you want to play man coverage as much as they did towards the end of last year. I think that's going to be an area where they continue to look for help.
The Vikings also announced a couple staffing additions this week. One of them we had known about, Jordan Traylor. He's coming and is basically filling Grant Udinsky's role on the offensive side. But then they also added Charlie Fry, who is a former NFL quarterback, but he's going to be working on the defensive side of the ball. He was on Brian Flores' Miami staff in 2021 coaching quarterbacks. Andrew, I think you heard a little bit more about him this week. What was that?
Yeah, it sounds like Brian Flores set out this offseason. And we know every year he goes into the offseason wanting to get ahead of the trends, get ahead of whatever teams are doing to defenses and what's becoming popular to try and project that. And he went into this offseason wanting to add a quarterback to his defensive staff. And Charlie Fry, we know, has obviously history with Flores. His only other NFL stop was in 2021 with the Dolphins as quarterbacks coach. He's coming from college now, has only coached offense, obviously played quarterback, but he's going to give that defensive side of the ball kind of an idea about pre-snap movements and how to adjust to those from a defensive back perspective or defensive front perspective as well. And that's just something that's interesting that I'm sure Flores has already done this before coming to Minnesota, but Kevin O'Connell talks about this a lot, of getting the other side's perspective on what he's doing, talking about Bobby McCain on the scout team, picking his brain about what his offense is trying to do. This is kind of in that vein for Flores to bring in a quarterback on his defensive staff, somebody, again, who has no history of coaching defense, but to just speak that language and try to convey things, whether it's to players or just other coaches on the defensive staff, about what they're trying to do and what a quarterback is thinking against what they're doing. And so it's obvious, but from what I heard, it was specifically about pre-snap movement and the intricacies of what teams are doing in the NFL these days. It comes from college. Charlie Frye just coached in college recently as well. And so teams are kind of trending more toward that kind of college style of just sending guys in orbit motions. It's not just the jet sweep stuff anymore. We see really fancy ways that Kevin O'Connell likes to stack his receivers and get free releases. So I think this is one way that Flores is trying to stay ahead of things. And that's why you saw a quarterback getting added to that staff.
Well, it's sort of the flip of Grant Udinski, because Grant Udinski was a college defensive end. And I think that's part of the reason people talk about him as good of an educator as he is at the quarterback position, because a lot of his background is saying, here's what a defensive front is going to do. And I could catalog these things because I played them, and I can kind of help you get inside their head. So yeah, it's Oppo research kind of stuff. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and you see teams do it where they'll kind of, I mean, O'Connell will talk about this with Brian Flores. We used to hear this with Mike Zimmer and Norv Turner back when they were getting along, about being able to pick each other's brains about, hey, what would you do to attack me here? So there's a lot of benefit. I think coaches find a lot of benefit in having that perspective and being able to ask for that from another coach on the staff. So I think it helped Udinski, probably will help Charlie Frye in that regard as well.
Surely, if the Vikings do not hold the record already for most former quarterbacks on an NFL coaching staff, they must be getting close. And it would not surprise me if we saw even more in the next year or so and just coming up. But we should do a count on that and figure out where they stand among all.
That's Kevin O'Connell's version of just one more. Like, he gets into the offseason of, how many more quarterbacks do you need? I need more. Give me more.
More quarterbacks, more former quarterback coaches, more former quarterbacks themselves, just QBs. We got to talk to 6 of the Vikings' new signees this week virtually. We had a day with the defensive guys. Mark Craig, our colleague, wrote a piece on that'll have a lot of the information there that was actually said that day. But in terms of just the defensive guys themselves and where this defense is, Ben, I know you dug into that a little bit today in your newsletter. I was going to make this correction on air for us. It's Javon Hargrave, not Javon. We've definitely said it wrong on here before, and I just wanted to make sure we got that right, because he did correct everyone on our call the other day. So Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, and then Isaiah Rodgers were the 3 who spoke the other day.
Yeah. And it is interesting, because looking into this a little bit this week, I wrote about this for the newsletter today. The sweet spot of Leslie Frazier's defenses when he was a coordinator here was his 3rd year, which was 2009, when the Williams wall is at its peak and they go to the NFC title game. Mike Zimmer, 3rd and 4th year, 16 and 17. Year 4 for him was 17, and probably a little more of a rehabilitation project than Leslie Frazier perhaps had, but that was kind of the sweet spot for him. I'm wondering if we are getting to that point here with this group, because we have seen this before when they had to kind of go through the reset of the roster in 2020. I think this was when they start getting rid of Rhodes and Joseph, and eventually that leads to Kendricks a couple of years later, and you start having to turn over some of these spots. It can be difficult to do that on the fly, and this is a group that will be more talented on the front 7 than I think we've seen in a long time. This type of investment at defensive tackle they have not made in years, and they'll have 2 former Pro Bowlers on the defensive tackle in that group for the first time since 2018, when they added Sheldon Richardson as kind of that +1 in a defense that was already pretty stacked in the front 7. So you'll have that. You'll have Grenard, Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner. I think they're hoping for more in year 2. Cashman, Ivan Pace, Harrison Phillips. You add more depth. I wouldn't be surprised to see them add another defensive tackle. So there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of variety in this group. But you have Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, both in their 30s. Jonathan Allen coming off of the pec injury. Hargrave, I think it was a tricep. And Allen also has had a left knee in the past that I would keep an eye on as well. So you're not talking about these guys being 5-year solutions. Blake Cashman turns 29 this year. I believe Van Ginkel's a free agent after this year. Cashman's a free agent after 26. So the idea of keeping a defense together and keeping 11 pieces healthy and under contract and happy and staying ahead of the scheme shifts, we've seen it before. It is a moving target. So they will continue to have to refresh this group. And the other piece of it to keep in mind is that Brian Flores' contract is up after this season. And whether it's a head coaching job after he had a few interviews for those or defensive coordinator jobs, he'll be in high demand. So he will need a new contract to stay here in the future. There are a lot of pieces here that are together right now, but whether it's age or whether it's contracts or any of those types of things, it is difficult to keep a defense kind of in this kind of a spot for very long. So they have it right now, but there are questions to be answered in the future. So a lot of what I got into today was just that. I mean, they've got this front seven that bears Flores' imprint probably more than anything we've seen in Minnesota, but it can be hard to keep it that way for, more than a year or two at a time.
Not to make it seem like not to make it seem like the sky is going to fall after this season, right, Ben?
Well, yeah, but it is. I mean, it's the reality of this business where you have guys that are going to want to get paid. You're going to have guys that hit contracts, and they have had a preference for older players. And the result of that sometimes is you get guys towards the end of their careers or guys that you may not sign for another contract. I mean, Harrison Smith that question is going to come up. Josh Metellus is a free agent after this year who will need a new deal. I expect he will get one, but there are a lot of those questions to come with this group.
So Derek Harmon, you are a Minnesota Viking.
Well, I think that's a good possibility. Yes.
We'll get there. That's in our listener question bit to wrap up at the end. But Andrew, you and I were on yesterday when the offensive guys talked, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, and then Jordan Mason. And you and I think, very much enjoyed Jordan Mason's commentary. And we learned, for as brief as he was in most of his answers, I think we learned a lot about who he is as a person and his play style.
We really did. We did. He's not a man of many words. He breaks more tackles than I think he spoke words on that presser, but I loved it because he was incredibly honest. Brevity was obviously his thing, but he was asked basically just, what running backs do you study? And he's basically, I'd be lying if I said I study any. I probably should, He's just kind of okay with just saying that. And then at one point he talked about his relationship with Javon Hargrave and saying that, respect is built by punching people in the mouth. And then I followed up and said, well, the Vikings need somebody who can do that. How much do they talk to you about doing that here? And he's just like, well, I'm just going to be myself. And then he just left it at that. And then he started off, though. Somebody had asked, what did you like about Kevin O'Connell's offense, coming to a talented and a productive system? And he said, well, they just want to give me the ball. That's what I love about it. So he's here to run the ball. He's here to run through people's faces. And he's not here to do a whole lot of studying unless they want him to. So I think it's exactly what they need, honestly. So somebody had said to me, like, why is that guy not a Detroit Lion? He just screams Dan Campbell. Yeah. I think the Vikings need a dose of that. They need some of that smash mouth, however you want to phrase it, cliche kind of football, because there's a reason they bring in Ryan Kelly, who we'll also talk about, was quintessential offensive lineman. Like, you felt like Ryan Kelly was going to reach through the Zoom and drag you across the goal line as if you were the running back. It was awesome to talk to those guys, and you can just see what the Vikings saw in the people. And then when you watch them play, obviously they need all of that as well. But Mason, he will be not only the complement to Aaron Jones as a player, but the complement to Aaron Jones as a personality, because Aaron Jones is vivacious, open, honest. He'll tell you, he'll chew your ear off about everything and how much he loves everything. And Jordan Mason's like, I'm just here to run the football and run through people.
Jordan Mason, favorite Ivan Pace training camp around game days when they're in pads. Get your popcorn ready.
Yep. My favorite Jordan Mason quote, I think, was about working with Aaron Jones. Someone was like, what are you looking forward to about working with him? And he starts, I see it working great. But then he goes, when football actually plays out, some things hit the fan, some things work. We'll see how that goes. And I was like, he thinks maybe he might steal that job and like end up with more reps, which is interesting. But again, speaks to that kind of like confident, bordering towards a little cocky personality that I think the Vikings need. He also he was singing when he turned on his Zoom camera, which was also a phenomenal moment. So.
It was. I had high hopes that he was going to start just kind of being that same Aaron Jones personality. And then I was still, while he didn't meet my expectations, I still came away loving this guy because he was absolutely very true to himself and a caricature of the kind of, like I said, smash mouth football that they need.
Andrew, you mentioned, obviously, we also heard from Ryan Kelly, and he was the most long-winded. He was the veteran. He had the nice, long paragraph answers, very eloquent and well-spoken. But the theme that kind of emerged for me talking to him, and then also Will Fries that I wrote about yesterday, was how important it is for them coming in together, that they have this chemistry already built up as these two cogs that are supposed to be the center of this retooling of the offensive line for the Vikings, which is something we've been talking so much about. So I'm curious what stood out to you from either of them in their commentary, specifically around that, but then also just kind of in general as well.
Yeah, and you can just watch them play. I mean, I ended up going through for a piece on StarTribune.com, watching a lot of their games last year together. They've started 28 games together in 3 years. Obviously, just the first 5 last year because Will Fries broke his leg. But whether it was against Green Bay or Chicago, those guys just work in tandem so well for guys that clearly, as Ryan Kelly had said, we were all drafted to Indianapolis. None of us had been anywhere else, the entire offensive line. So they got to build that continuity and they got to build that familiarity in a way that the Vikings did too, perhaps at the expense of the ceiling that they had been looking for from that group. They just kind of kept them together. They promote from within with Blake Brandel. They hold on to Ed Ingram probably too long. And obviously Garrett Bradbury was here for 6 years. So the Vikings are going to gut that, but yet still bring in some of that same chemistry by virtue of both those guys coming in together from the same team. And Emily, you wrote about this too, but Ryan Kelly said it was 10 hours after I agreed to terms. Will Fries texts me and says, man, I'm coming too. And he's like, this does not happen. What are we talking about? And he was just psyched at how awesome that was. And so I think this is much like Jordan Mason. It seems like exactly what they need up front, not just with their play styles, but their personalities as well. These guys, Garrett Bradbury was incredibly nice, one of the most well-liked people in the locker room, but nobody would describe him as having an edge away from the field. And both of those guys, Fries and Kelly, you could just sense it. You could sense that by hearing them and talking to them, you could guess how they play. And also with Will Fries, he mentions that his dad had been putting him through rigorous workouts since he was in 4th grade. He said, I had chains on my back. I'm flipping tires and all this stuff. And he goes, it's kind of funny looking back at it now. And I'm like, yeah, maybe now that you have $88 million, it is. But if it didn't pay off that way, it was just a fourth grader with chains on his back.
Yeah.
Do the high school track athletes? Did the high school track athletes go through that, Ben? Chains on the back, flipping tires?
I've seen people flip tires. I mean, yeah, the throwers certainly won't, because the throwers are all linemen in football anyway. So, yeah, I mean, some of that stuff, just creating explosion. I mean, typically for sprinters, it's the parachutes on the back more so than chains. I'm trying to think if it's typically more parachutes, but I'm trying to think if I've seen anything along those lines. But yes, have seen the tires with the throwers. I mean, because those are typically, it's the linemen do that, and then the skill position guys are sprinters.
Yeah, Will said, I'm not going to be outworked by anybody because of this. And hey, I'm not doubting him, that's for sure.
We got a couple questions from listeners and followers to wrap on. Very few of which this time, if any. I don't even know if I saw Rodgers in there at all this time, but we'll start with this one for you, Ben, from Brady Jenkins. I know you've talked a bit about it, but why are the Vikings dumping cap costs into next year? What is the grand plan? Spend heavy now and then rely on a heavy draft next year, where we have a full draft, including a 3rd and 4th round compensatory as it stands right now.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good read on it. I mean, the reality this year is that they don't have the draft picks to fill out the roster, and they are still in this kind of weird spot that they always seem to be in, where they're coming off a competitive season, but they also have all of these long-term decisions to make, and they have a quarterback question too, in terms of if JJ McCarthy takes the job for good this year, or if he still needs a little more time for whatever alternative would come through the door. But yes, I think that's a lot of it. Is they only have the 4 draft picks now, with the Cousins pick becoming official at the end of the 3rd. and they still want to be able to compete this year. So I think a lot of it was that. And then you can't probably get all of these guys in on market rate deals if you're paying all of them big numbers in 2025. So some of it was kind of pushing things down the road. The cap will continue to go up. I think people are starting to get a little worried about their 2026 number. You look at some of those things. I think I would not spend a ton of time worrying about that right now, because there's still probably a Brian O'Neill move to make to get more cap space back. I think TJ Hawkinson probably gets restructured here at some point, whether that's this year or next year. There are going to be moves like that they can make to alleviate some of the cap issues that look like they're there right now. And there just are numerous ways to deal with those things going forward that we've seen them use. And when the cap continues to go up, like we expect it will, really through the end of the decade, they're going to have ways to move money around, and they get to roll over whatever they don't spend this year. So everybody kind of keeps asking, what are they stashing all this money for this year? I mean, they're going to have money to still be active this year. They'll be able to do other things. I don't know that it's all going to go to one guy. You're going to have needs that come up. They're going to, I think, want to have ways to be able to make moves going into the summer, even going into the season. I mean, having the flexibility to do that is great. But if they roll over $20 million in the next year, they get to spend every dime of that if they want to do it. So whether it's that, whether it's some of the restructures, I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. I think it's worth keeping an eye on, I guess, but I don't think they're going to find themselves in a terrible cap situation, because they watch it pretty closely. I mean, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah talks a lot about planning in 2-year cycles. And if you look at this as the start of one, or, in some ways, I suppose you could say it's the second year of the one with JJ McCarthy, but really it's the first year that you're out of the big quarterback costs. So I think if you're saying this is a 2-year cycle, they've planned for all of this for next year already. And I think they go in with their eyes open to what it is and what they'll have to do to manage the cap going forward as well.
Yeah, and to that point, you talk about only the 4 draft picks. According to Over the Cap, they've got 66 guys now. That still leaves 24 contracts to bring in to hit that 90-man mark. And if you only have 4 controlled cost draft picks, that leaves you 20 guys to negotiate and add with. And you got all that cap space now. It's at least going to give you some room to add guys who might want a little bit more money than minimum.
Yeah.
Andrew, I'll toss this next one to you first. From Rob J. What are the Vikings going to do about left guard? Obviously, they have right guard figured out. Will Fries did say yesterday that it is his assumption he'll be playing on the right side. But what do we think about that left side of the line?
They paid Blake Brandel to come in here and be that starter, and they tried to sign him to that extension off the RFA tender last year to get ahead of that, maybe thinking, hey, he could play up to that level, be the starter. If you guys remember, like, they named him the starter in May, and this was something that even when they brought Dalton Reisner back, they never put Dalton into the first team lineup. That was always going to be Blake's spot. So with all that said, I don't think they're bailing on Blake at this point. That would just be my guess based on the personnel they currently have on the roster and the money allocated to it. That doesn't mean, though, that he doesn't have to earn that job back, or he'll be competing with a Walter Rouse or a draft pick or another free agent addition, somebody to come in. I just can't. I wouldn't foresee the situation where they are saying, Blake, this is your job again, unimpeached. I would assume that there's going to be competition there now that you've got the other 4 spots solidified.
Well, we can all answer this last one. This one is from @VikesFan33. With the biggest part of free agency being complete, what is the number 1 position you would circle as a potential Vikings target at number 24, that first pick that they have in the draft this year? And what position may be a sleeper at 24? And then this was not from this same commenter, but I'll toss this in as well. Is there a tight end possibility anywhere in this draft for the Vikings?
Yeah, what do you think, Ben?
Well, I mean, the spots for the pick, I think defensive tackle is still going to be a need. I mean, they addressed it this year, but you've got 2 guys in their 30s. I think you probably still look for somebody long-term there. I think the offensive line, if you find a guard that you like, probably makes some sense. I wonder even about, this is a sleeper need, but right tackle, I wonder about just a little bit. With Brian O'Neill already heading into his 30s, the contract is expensive. He'll be a free agent after this year. Do they think about what the future of that looks like. It's possible they'll sign him to a new deal, and he's here another 3, 4, 5 years after this. Once this contract is done, but I think that's probably a kind of a back pocket need, I guess. And then corner is always going to be something that is going to be addressed. I think they know that they need more help at corner. I mean, just even hearing this week, defensive tackle and corner came up in a couple conversations I had this week. And I think that will be a focus certainly too. And a tight end. Yeah. I mean, I think if they find one they like, I think it's certainly an option. There was actually a kid a UMD kid the other day at the Gophers Pro Day that was running, I think I thought I heard maybe in the 4.6 range, and looked athletic, was catching the ball well, and I think he weighed in at like 240 something. So it could be a receiving target tight end. I mean, a guy that maybe is worth keeping in mind as a undrafted free agent. So there could be ways to address it along those lines as well. But Josh Oliver at a big number. Johnny Munt, the irreplaceable Johnny Munt, is gone. And TJ Hawkinson, that contract probably gets addressed. I would think another addition there would make some sense.
Bulldogs great Sam Pitts
is
out there running around. Yeah. I think the tight end one's interesting because do they think TJ Hawkinson can be what he was? And do we think he was what he was? I mean, it doesn't matter what we think, but do they think it? Because he just didn't look the exact same. It's to be expected, perhaps, coming off that injury. And there were just moments last year when he spoke to the media that he kind of, seemed resigned to the fact that year he wasn't going to get up to fully where he wanted to get to. So I think his health and his situation's huge. Ben talked about potential restructure down the line. He was paid as the highest paid tight end, right? Or second highest or something like that.
Yeah, I think it ended up being second highest because I think there was one of those things where the sticker price came in and made him the highest, but it was like if he actualizes all of the incentives in this, he'll hit it. But yeah, I think when it comes down to it, he's second and probably has moved down the list a little bit now.
And Josh Oliver, obviously, there's somebody they love, and even in Hawkinson's stead, played very, very well at the beginning of last year. So it's an interesting spot. I do wonder, though, with their focus on Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, this could be a predominantly two tight end offense that tries to run the ball, and that could open up more room for additions. Because not only did Johnny Munt leave, they lost Nick Muse, who went and signed with Philadelphia in January, somebody that they were trying to develop behind the scenes as that kind of third, fourth tight end option. So they lost Ben Sims a few years ago to the Packers. The guys they brought up in their system have kind of come and gone. So it wouldn't shock me if they add somebody there. But 24th overall, I don't think that makes a ton of sense considering their roster, considering the needs that Ben talked about, corner, defensive tackle. You could still use a guard if the position value they think is worth it at that spot. Running back would seem to be out the window at this point, considering what they paid Aaron Jones and signed Jordan Mason to an extension upon getting him. What did you think, though? I saw Daniel Jeremiah, who's kind of the standard bearer for this stuff this time of year, mocked a safety to them, kind of noting that Harrison Smith has got to be at some point on his last legs.
Was it the Georgia kid?
I can't remember.
Something mocking a Georgia safety to them. It's like, a Georgia safety in the back of the first round.
He's not the only one. There was one like a month ago I looked at. So obviously an earlier one, a pre-combine one that had, I don't remember which one it was, that mocked a safety. I could see it as a sleeper, like a cornerback safety. Obviously we've mentioned cornerback being a position of need, but it feels like it's fallen more into that sleeper realm for the first overall pick with them. And it feels like they'll lean more towards defensive tackle, especially. That's still where my money would be, especially if they can get Derek Harmon. But
it's one guy on their priority list. I heard that again this week.
Yeah, but one guy in that cornerback safety maybe can do both realm that I remember listening in on for a little bit at the combine was Texas's Jahdae Barron. He just listening to him, he gave Brian Flores defender to me, so might have to do a little bit more poking in on him, but he seemed like he would fit that bill. So maybe I'll toss him as a sleeper. I don't know. Safety
Nick Imanwori out of South Carolina.
From South Carolina. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I could see that too.
And he won, if you're going to win the combine, he kind of had one of the best workouts there, just showing that he's incredibly athletic. So it's interesting because we know that it doesn't, with Flores, it doesn't have to fit into a bucket. It doesn't have to be this guy who's a corner and that's just all they see him as, or just a safety. If they see a guy and they think, God, he could play nickel, he could come into the box, do the Harrison Smith stuff from 5-10 years ago. I could see that. Yeah, I could see that making sense. And for as great as Metellus is, we know he was a 6th round pick because he was a limited athlete. And so they could bring in that kind of top tier athlete they thought Lewis Seen was 3 years ago. It might help quite a bit.
I have one here from email, and you can always email these to us too at accessvikings@startribune.com. Rick asks, with Brandon Powell currently unsigned, who is likely to be this season's punt returner? They have some options here probably now between Isaiah Rodgers, Rondale Moore. They put some guys in here that have special teams experience and have some speed. So I think there's a couple of different ways they could go here.
Yeah, Rondale Moore's done it before. I do wonder that how much of an underrated issue has that been for them? Because it just wasn't good last year. Brandon Powell the last couple years
hasn't been good since Marcus Sherrills, really, right?
We're still talking about Marcus because of how good he was. They've just not had the consistency, the game breaking, none of it. And this is going back to even last year where Brandon Powell, when he gets knocked out, they turn to Jalen Naylor, who flies the ball over his head, and it turns into a big Packers touchdown right before halftime.
Yeah, they're up 28-0 at Lambeau, and he loses it. It's tough sky out there, as the center fielders like to say in baseball.
And so this is an underrated kind of need for them of like shoring it up and finding a way to level out the special teams play in a way that it doesn't seem they've found that consistency across all those phases recently under Matt Daniels. So I do think some of that's personnel, some of it's the roster changes. There's a line of thinking that usually it's the bad teams that have good special teams play, and the Vikings have had good veterans get promoted up, like a Josh Metellus, and leave some of those special teams phases. So
I heard that line of thinking from people in the Vikings building.
yeah, exactly. So I just think that how much of it's to be 5-alarm fire about, or how much of it's just a natural transition because the roster is transitioning. But that punt returner spot's one of the most visible spots and one of the most ones that can break a game and change a game for you. And the Vikings have just not had that for years, from Mike Hughes to Brandon Powell now to whoever it's going to be. I didn't know Isaiah Rodgers had a ton of experience doing it. Do we know, is he going to be like a potential option for them?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think how much of it he has done. Yeah, I mean, he certainly can fly. I mean, he was a guy that he has not done. Well, no, I take that back. He has done it in the NFL. He has been more of a kick returner than a punt returner. He has, I think, scored a kick return touchdown as a rookie, and returned 24 kicks that year for almost 700 yards. Basically, it was a kick returner in Philly last year too, but didn't field many of them because people aren't kicking the ball to returners very much. But he has returned punts just a little. I think returned 3 punts in the NFL. So he's been more kicks than punts, but they could probably use some help there as well. They haven't been, and the kick return thing, we'll see more about that at the owners' meetings here if they're going to finalize and keep the kickoff rule. I think there's been talk about moving the touchback. They had discussed the touchback line being the 35 instead of the 30. So, they're trying to find that point where people say, hey, I don't want to spot somebody the ball 65 yards from the end zone. Let's just kick it deep and try to pin them, because they want more kick returns with this new dynamic kickoff. But we'll see where that goes. But Rodgers has been more of a kick returner than a punt returner in his career.
Either way, it's probably going to be somebody new, unless because Brandon Powell does remain a free agent for now, but they seem to have moved on from him. Yeah,
and then I just thought this one from my buddy Joel was good too. He just asked, do you think a long-term deal with Jordan Addison is likely, or do you foresee them letting him walk after the T. Higgins deal? Like, that's really only a year or two away. They'll have a 5th-year option in there, but they're going to start asking that question. He's heading into year 3. And that'll be on their radar here, not in the not too distant future.
And the Eagles faced a similar question when they decided to pay Devonta Smith. Yeah. And I find Devonta, an interesting comp to Jordan Addison. They're different players in their own rights, but they're also similar in being undersized, good route runners, good deep threats, all that stuff, and good number twos in a good offense. The Eagles decided to keep their guy. I imagine the Vikings look at that. Not to say that they're going to copy the Eagles on everything, but this whole trench focus would sure seem to be kind of a little bit of a follower there. But we know O'Connell loves Addison, loves the way that he sets up Jefferson and the other way around. I would imagine that because of their lack of number 3 options, they wouldn't just want Jordan to walk out the door without knowing we got a stud behind him.
Yeah, and if nothing else, it's a reason why. And we've talked about this a little bit as a sneaky need, but wide receiver depth, I think, is something that they could still look to address here at some point, and that may be another reason for it. And you can always find receivers in the draft. They don't have a ton of picks to do it, but even next year, that could be something they say, hey, let's kind of keep that in our view of how to address the draft, because you can either get some cost control or additional depth if you are going to keep Jordan Addison.
If they put that 5th-year option on him, we're probably going to see the hashtag free 3 once again.
Yeah. Well, he said that's not what it was about, but it did seem the timing was interesting.
Yeah, I don't believe you, Jordan.
Well, we brought it back around there to the draft talk, and we will certainly have a lot more draft talk and draft writing over the next month until that happens in Green Bay, which my father keeps asking me why it's in Green Bay. He's like, where are they doing it? What is it going to look like? And I'm like, probably right outside Lambeau is my guess.
So.
Like, I don't know.
I think it's in the parking lot, isn't it?
The key. Yeah, I think so from looking at the mock-ups and the visualizations, but we're just a little over a month away from the draft now. That'll be end of April. And then we might have quarterback news before that. We might have quarterback news after that. No one be holding your breath because we do not know when that will shake out. But it does seem like we're probably, can I get the knock on wood? I need to put this in here as like
we should have hung her out to dry there. Just let her do it on her own.
I really need
who's doing the dad jokes now?
I just need to get it so we can pop it in over the top. I'm going to have it ready for next time and for all future pods. But knock on wood, it seems like of you guys doing it. I'll put in the little GIF of you doing it. Seems like we're in the clear on the Rodgers to Minnesota talk. So thank you guys for listening and or watching this episode of the podcast. Please check out all of our work on thestartribune.com, and we will talk to you and probably make more silly dad jokes next time.